it's meant to give you two layers of learning, right? What the very top layer, surface layer learning is that you're learning to improve your ear. You're learning how to hear the different intervals. You're learning how to score read. You're learning how to solfege. You're learning how to play the rhythms. There'll be a whole set of rhythm exercises that I'll give you. So you're on the base level, surface level, you're learning how to improve your ability to hear things, right? But more importantly, all of these exercises are meant to give you a data point into how your mind perceives information, right? So I think my mentor, Marion Plugger, talks about 3 phases of the learning, right? And you can apply this to any of your disciplines in your fields, right? So let's make a analogy to learning a particular set skill, right? So it could be your training, but let's make it very simple. So let's say shooting a basketball into a hoop, right? So when somebody who has never shot a basketball, never touched a basketball, never been on a basketball court, right, is asked to shoot a free throw into the hoop, that first phase is called roughing it, right? Because they're trying to figure out the parameters of all the aspects of the weight of the ball, how it feels in the hands, the distance between the free throw line to the board, the size of the hoop, the net, the angle that you have to sort of throw the ball in your hands, how you have to hold the ball, right? So all of these things, if you've never done it, you have to figure out, okay, how heavy is this ball? How far away am I? At what angle do I have to release the ball? You're collecting all of these data. And in the beginning, even though you may have watched thousands of basketball games or seen other people do it, for you to actually do it, it's a brand new set of information that you're trying to absorb, right? So in that roughing in stage, you're just busy collecting data about what of all the aspects involved in shooting a basketball, right? So in this phase, you should be collecting information, right? But many times people tend to go into this mode of, why can't I do this? So they expend a lot of energy berating themselves the fact that they can't shoot a perfect free throw, right? So after a long time, and that idea where you have to spend 10,000 hours to be good at something, right? I think that study, if you actually read further into the study, it's how you spend that 10,000 hours that's just as important, right? So if you're mindlessly just shooting free throws for 10,000 hours, it does not mean you'll become an NBA player, right? You have to actually spend the time to gather data about what you're doing and whether you're doing it correctly or not. So if you're doing something for 10,000 hours incorrectly, you're not going to be able to shoot a free throw correctly, right? Because if your angle is wrong all the time and you just get used to a wrong angle, then you're just practicing something that's incorrect and then ingraining that into your physical memory, right? So in the same way, many times when people practice their instrument, oftentimes they're practicing a little bit mindlessly. So in this roughing in phase, if you're not gathering data about what your perceptions are, what your tendencies are, right, then you will practice something incorrectly. And then the myelins in your brain will form around that particular incorrect procedure. And then it'll be much more difficult to undo that wrong thing that you've learned, right? So, there's a piece I learned as a 5-year-old, Beethoven's Feuerlings, and I make the same mistake that I made as a 5-year-old. I mean, have you experienced that? Where you're playing the piece and then it might be a octave or whatever it is, it causes you to stumble, and then it's the same place you keep stumble, because rather than slowing it down and figuring out what happened, what did my fingers do, you just say, and you go back to the beginning, do it again, and then you come to that same place and you fall down again, and you go, ah, and then you go back to the beginning, do it again, and then same place, you go, ah, and then by the time you do it 5 times, what you have just done is you've practiced the mistake into your physical system, right? So when I see teachers teach young students all the time, they're constantly telling young musicians, slow it down so that you can observe the information at the speed you can digest it. But of course, we're all impatient. So no, I just want to play it. So we keep playing the mistake over and over in that roughing in stage, right? So it's really crucial that we allow our brain to actually perceive the information, right? When things are going fast, our stress level will increase, right? Our 3 tendencies of mistakes, anticipation, looking back, all of these will increase, right? Rather than relaxing and trying to perceive what is that note, what do I need to do physically to play that note correctly, right? There's a famous bass player who was Oliver Knusson's father, and he was famous for taking on students, but had a very stringent rule, which was he would not take on somebody who was already an established player, right? He would only take on somebody who was an absolute beginner, and he would absolutely forbid them to practice outside of his supervision. So for the first 2 years, it's basically an apprenticeship, right? The student is not allowed to touch the instrument without the teacher being present, right? So slowly and methodically, he would work with the student and then gently point out, okay, your arm is tense, so take out the tension. So take out all of the bad habits that are beginning to form in the student as the student learns the instrument, right? But most of us don't have that kind of benefit, right? We basically are given an instrument. You might work with the teacher once a week, and we spend all of our time away from the teacher, away from the supervision, mindlessly playing the mistake over and over again, right? So what happens with this bass teacher, Oliver Knusson's father, within a year, the student, no matter where they started, is already playing at a very, very high level without any bad habits, without any obstacles, right? Because they haven't had any chance to develop any bad habits, right? Why do you take lessons? One of the things you take lessons for is to have somebody look at what you're doing, and then not only teach you a particular skill, particular fingering, particular bowing, particular way of playing, but also look at what you're doing physically and then trim away the bad habits, right? But oftentimes that amount of time we spend alone practicing, where we're gathering bad habits, gathering incorrect way of playing, gathering incorrect way of hearing, gathering incorrect way of berating ourselves through the 3 mistakes, right? In the roughing in phase, that causes the inefficiency that most people after a couple of years have formed so many bad habits that, I don't know how to do this anymore. I can't, maybe I'm just a bad musician. No, it's just that you allowed yourself to collect a set of bad habits that really got in the way of you having fluency. All right. So that first phase of learning, that roughing in phase, right? You're going to go through this with our conducting class, right? There are many things that you will be doing unconsciously, right? That has nothing to do with the music, right? It tends to be all of us have a way of expressing, and in the beginning, it is impossible to be aware of all the things that we're doing physically, whether it's the head movement, whether it's how we hold the baton, whether we're mirroring, okay? So I'm gonna be on a constant lookout for things that you guys are doing that are not related to the music, but it's a formation of bad habits, bad practice, inefficient way of doing things. But I don't have access to you 24 hours a day as you practice all the sessions, okay? So in many ways, you have to be your best teacher in examining what you're doing. So videos, conducting in front of a mirror, and actually observing what you're doing physically is really important, right? Because oftentimes when we do conducting practice or even our instrumental practice, we're sort of in isolation and we are not using a mirror. We're not looking at ourselves on video or even audio tape. And we sort of do it and expect to be able to give ourselves feedback. Well, that's impossible. You have to have some way of being able to observe your own way of doing things, whether playing instrument, doing an exercise, where you can give yourself feedback, right? So that's really, really important in all of your skill sets, where you have the ability to look at what you're doing and give yourself feedback. Make sense? Okay, so then there's a second phase of learning, which is the perfecting phase, right? So now at this point, you're able to throw, if you think about it, if you think about all the things you need to do correctly, you're making maybe 10 out of 20 free throw shots, okay? You're identifying intervals maybe half the time, okay? And you're able to, if you try hard enough, right, that you can perfect it, right? And it becomes about making attempts with a conscious set of awareness that, okay, my arms are doing this, and I need to really watch my head. I need to relax the tension. But at this phase, this is the danger. Sometimes you will get fluency, but you will not get fluency all the time because you're still trying, right? So sometimes you get the shot in. You won't know why you made it in, but it worked, right? So here the danger is, the first part of the roughing it phase, the danger is you are subconsciously incompetent, right? You don't even know what you're doing and it's not working, right? In the perfecting phase, you're consciously incompetent or competent, right? So when you are, when you make the shot, okay, I did that, I observed that I did that, or when you don't make the shot, oh, I released it too early. So you're becoming aware of why certain things happen, right? But you're still not at fluency, okay? The highest level of fluency is you're subconsciously competent, right? You make the shot without thinking about it because it's just natural to you. You're making 19, 20 out of 20 shots as you make the free throw. And you're in that fluency mode, right? You're in the zone, as they say in the sports world, right? Because you're not really thinking about consciously dictating, my arm has to do this in that shape and release that forward. You're not that all that chatter is sort of subsided because physically your body has learned what to do, right? So now, as you get to that fluency level, sometimes people fall back, right? Because they've been so used to this perfecting a stage where they have to consciously think about all of the actions that they're doing. So it's like pedaling downhill on a bike. If you're already moving well, you don't need to pedal more. In fact, if you pedal harder, your chain might get caught up, right? So that once you get to that third level, it's just allowing your, what Marian Plugger always used to say, taste the note in the moment. Don't anticipate, don't look back, don't think about what's coming up. Hear the note in the moment that you're playing and enjoy that. Taste it and let it go, right? Then you will have fluency, right? So from roughing it to perfecting phase to fluency level, fluency phase, right? There are different adjustments you have to make, right? In the roughing it phase, you have to actually gather all the data, right? You have to slow down and figure out what's happening, what you're doing physically, right? In the perfecting phase, now you have to actually make the right choices, right determinations physically, right? But you're consciously making those choices to make sure that you're checking off all the 9 things you have to do to make the perfect free throw, right? In the fluency phase, you have to let it go. You're not obsessively thinking about the 9 things you got to do, because as you do that, you actually get in the way of your body, because your body already at this third stage knows what you're doing, what you're supposed to be doing, right? If you play the die chord, your body already hears it. It's yellow, it's red, right? It's not thinking, is it really red? Is it, I think it was yellow, right? So you're not self-doubting, going back, anticipating, and doing all those things. So the 3 phases of learning that I'm going to pull you through, you have to think about your strategies in different ways depending on where you are, what phase you are in, right? So if you're in the roughing in phase, everything is brand new. I can't hear anything. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, then slow things down, right? And don't lock up, right? Don't get stressed out. Don't berate yourself, right? Allow yourself to perceive, okay, what's happening, right? And be objective rather than subjective, right? One of the biggest mistakes young musicians, beginning level, whenever we are learning something new, right? That stress level of frustration usually is, for almost 70% of people, that's what stops you from learning a new skill, right? So understand in the roughing in phase, I will most likely fail 80% of the time, but use that failure as a data point. Okay, why didn't I hear that interval? Why did I miss that interval? Okay, let's try to figure that out, right? So be in the data gathering mode in the roughing in phase. Then once you get to the perfecting phase, then you have to actually think about all the things you have to do to be able to execute that thing, right? So, and it depends on you. Some people stay in the perfecting phase for a very short time, okay? And then once you get to the fluency mode, fluency phase, then it's all about letting go, allowing your ear to listen, allowing the body to be without tension, letting go of the chatter, right? Quelch the chatter in your brain, right? Was that right? Did I do that right? Really calm it down, right? The big brother on your shoulder, just shut him up and say, no, I know what I'm doing, all right? So these 3 phases of learning is what we're going to be, you have to consciously aware of the different modes we're in. Most of us in the beginning conducting phase, we're in the first phase, roughing it mode. Okay, we're gathering data. So oftentimes you'll have to break things down. Rather than doing the whole Brahms, you may have to just focus on the first 8 bars or the 4 bars. All right, so you can actually, you're not worried about doing the whole thing, but you're actually focusing in on 4 bars, 8 bars. You can actually analyze what you're doing. You can slow things down. All right, let me slow it down. Oh, I moved my head, right? So slow things down to the point where you can observe what you're doing. Don't mindlessly do the exercise or do the ear training exercise and think that you're going to get perfection. Okay? Questions, comments? Okay, so one of the things that I want you to start to do, because we're going to try to have all the dichords be really fluent. Okay, so I want you this will be all of the assignments that I'm going to give you are continuing things. It's not really a thing that stops, right? Especially these ear training exercises, right? So I want you to really become familiar with the dichord intervals that you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then actually imagine on a piano keyboard what that interval looks like, right? Imagine the 2 fingers depressing if it's a 1, you depress a minor second, 2 a major second, so that this becomes automatic, right? You're not really having to, because right now you have to program your brain, because I think for most of you, dichord is new, correct? Raise your hand if it's new. Okay, so if it's not new, great. If it's new, you're translating minor second, major second, minor third, all of these intervals into a number, right? All right, and then I'll share a second document with you. Which is Marianne Ploger's picture of dichords, which is really interesting because she, and I'll put this in the resource link, okay? So what she does is she represents dissonant intervals, which are 1, 2, and 10, 11. So minor second, major second, minor seventh, major seventh. So dissonant intervals are very jagged, okay, because it's the fundamental and the harmonics are vibrating against each other. And then 3, 4, 8, 9s are modal dichords, right? So minor third, minor 6, major 6, right? 3, 4, 8, 9 are rounded, right? So they're 4 cycles per second rather than 7 cycles per second, right? So less vibrant than the dissonant dichords. And sometimes she uses different words to describe dissonance versus modal dichords. And then the perfect intervals, perfect dichords, 5, 6, and 7. So perfect fourth, tritone, and perfect fifth are straight edged like this, right? And then she uses this language of shadow on either left or right side of the number. I didn't want to do that. Yeah. Right. To determine whether it's a 1 versus a 2 or a 3 versus a 4. Okay. So what she's trying to do is she's trying to give you a physical sensation of the 7 cycles per second of the dissonant chords, the 4 cycles per second of the modal dichords, and then the perfect intervals, right? So when we hear a particular interval, we're hearing a physical characteristics of these dichord intervals, right? So the dissonant intervals of 1, 2, 10, 11 feels really vibrant because they're 7 cycles per second, right? And then within those dissonant intervals, there is a contracting 7 cycles per second and expansive 2s and 10s, which are expanding, right? And then modal dichords, which are 4 cycles per second, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, as opposed to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? And then perfect intervals are 1, 1, and. Okay, so let me quickly do another exercise with you. Hang on. Last time I lost audio. Okay. Yeah. Hang on. Okay, I'm going to play a whole bunch of, so if I do that, no. Oh, it's using my, okay. So this way you can see the keyboard, okay? Now, what we'll do is we're imagining the keyboard in our head. Sorry, it's a little backwards. Maybe just deal with it. Okay, so I'm going to play a set of 1s and 2s. Okay, and I'm going to do that same exercise. I'm going to play it at this tempo. And 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and I'll play a pattern to try to throw you off. Okay, so I might do, and then you're trying to name the dichord interval of between 1 and 2 on the offbeat of each beat. So you're going to listen on the downbeat, and then on the end of each beat, you're going to name the dichord. Okay, all right, here we go. Ready? Ready, 3 and 4 and. Yeah, can you do it with your fingers, like on your screens? Ready? Ready, and then. Yeah, those are all 1s, right? All 1s. As opposed to those are 2s. Okay, once again, here we go. Ready, and. Okay, now let me talk you through the 3 mistakes that you tend to do, right? Try to empty your brain, empty your mind so you can clearly hit an interval on the downbeats, right? Don't worry that if you miss something, then just drop it. Don't think about, I missed it. I missed that one. And then as you say that in your brain, you're going to miss the next interval. Okay, one more time. Okay, better. Now I'm seeing better percentage of correct ones and twos. Okay. All right. Talk me through what you're feeling in terms of how you're perceiving information.
It's easy to get caught up in the pattern, I guess, when your fingers just saying 1, 1, 1. Sometimes just naturally, even though you know it's your brain processes it's a 2, but you
Yeah.
might just put up 1 anyway, just because you've been putting up 1 the past 5 times.
Right. So what pattern is that? Is that reaction, looking back, or anticipation?
I would say reaction.
Uh, well, I mean, if I'm going to 1, and then fourth one, I play a 2, right? Because I've set up a pattern of 1s, right?
Yeah.
So you have to really allow the ear to perceive, oh, there was a 2, rather than a 1, 1, 1, oh, it's going to be a 1.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, let's try another one. Here we go. Ready? I'm going to go somewhere else on the keyboard. Yeah. Another thing that I want you to really try to do is really have a physical sensation of a contracting 1 versus so you're physically feeling the 2 different intervals. Ooh, that's contracting. Okay. And then what's even helpful is actually picture the 1 very dissonant, that very 7 cycles per second 1 in your visual image, right? The actual number 1 that's like vibrating. And then maybe the 1 is really intense, like red color, and then is more less intense color if it's a 2. Okay. All right. Now let's do 3s and 4s. Okay. Minor third versus major thirds. Okay. So 3 versus 4. Okay. All right. 3 is contracting. And then. Okay. All right. Here we go. Okay, last one was 4, right? I'll do it slow motion. Yeah, now, for some, going slower not necessarily makes it easier. Okay, but for some, if you're able to clear your mind, it becomes quite a bit easier. Okay, I'll go even slower. Now, if you go slower than that, it tends to increase it doesn't actually help because you actually allow the chatter to invade your mind more. Okay, so I'll go twice as slow than I just did. I'm doing 3s and 4s. Good, that was 1. All right. So as we're in 3 and 4s, I'll throw in a random number that's not 3s and 4s. So then you have to also not anticipate that it's going to be just from the set of 3 and 4. So as you can see, when we're in this mode of identifying ones and twos versus threes and fours, it's easier to let our mind wander a little bit, because you know it's just going to be ones and twos or threes and fours. But of course, as you expand the field to include all 12 pitches, then you have to think about, you know, making a top layer decision. Is this a dissonant or modal or perfect interval? And then you have to go in and further and say, is this a within the perfect interval 5, 6, or 7? Right? So you have to be really open to all 12 possibilities. Right? Make sense? Yeah. So today I exposed you to ones and twos and threes and fours. Right? Even if you don't have a practice, you can actually draw the keyboard and practice hearing the pitches. Right? So one great way to practice this is sing. Everybody sing the C. Yeah. Okay, now you're gonna sing a C sharp of that while I play only the C natural. Ready? Now sing a 2 above it. Okay, so if you can vocalize it, that's another way you can start to hear this interval, because you're physicalizing it another different way. Make sense? Okay, all right, enough from that. Okay, now I want to shift to our next excerpt to prepare a little bit for the 3-pattern legato. All right, so I'm going to share the screen too. Okay. So this is the Brandenburg Concerto number 2, movement 2. All right, and then I'll play. When I play this, you should be able to hear. Are you seeing the Brandenburg on the screen right now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then when I play this, can you hear the audio? Okay, that's a good stopping point. All right, now let's discuss why Makan Thekar chose this excerpt. What are some of the things that you want us to work on? Obviously, it's a 3/4 pattern that you want us to work on, right? All right, what else?
Compared to the other pieces, a lot of the parts are not the same, or not even, well,
exactly.
They're more
So,
different.
Right. So the Brahms was very homophonic. Everybody moved together, right? Now here we're dealing with a 4-part counterpoint, right? So you are really keeping track of the bass line, part 4, and then you have the 3 upper lines, which all have independent things that are happening at a different canonic structure, right? So you have to keep track of all the different entries, right? So one of the things that I want you to focus on as you prepare this excerpt, right, for class on Wednesday to conduct for each other, is to think about passive versus active beats, because it's easy to get into, because there are so many things going on, to be active all the time, right? Where each second, third beat, 1, 2, 3. It's same weight, same strength, same weight all the time. So how do you achieve a long linear line, right? Because we all agreed in the first couple of classes, we discussed about how to emphasize particular beats as the being most important, right? If you have a melody like we have here, how do you make each of the beats unequal, right? So for example, when you have this figure, let me go back to the screen. It's annoying that I have to keep giving permission. Oh. Okay. There we go. So look at this third part, right? Right there. Just that much, right? So if you're singing that, if you make everything equal strength, it becomes less musical, right? So where would you make the musical stress?
On 1 and 3.
1 and 3, right? So in this 3 4, we want 3 1 2 and 3 and 1 2. So 2 is really a weak beat, right? Right. So that you don't want to make 3 1 2 and 3 and 1 2. That's sort of a backward one-legged kind of interpretation. So you really want to emphasize 3 and 1. 3 1 and 3 and 1 2 1 2, right? Oftentimes people composers at this time have used trills as an ornament to emphasize beats that are important, right? So what you want to try to do is show that weight importance of a 3/4 structure where 3 and 1 are more important and 2 is less important, right? But if you do that every bar, it's going to become quite 3 1 3 1 3 1 3 1, right? So there are places where you have to really and da da dum ti da, so that beat 3 into the trill. So between 3 and 1, which is more important in this particular passage? 3 or 1?
I didn't hear that. What'd you say? Sorry, I missed that.
So the weight of 3 versus 1.
1.
One would be the.
Yeah, 1 would be a little more. If you go 3 1, right, it would be less musical. If you go 3 1,
Yeah.
and 3 and 1 2, right? So what you want to do is show that difference of weight between the 3 and 1 in this musical phrase, right? And each time a new instrument comes in, you're taking care of that new entry and showing that same shape with each instrument group that comes in. Okay, can we just try this, each of you? Right. So we'll just do like the first eight, 9 bars. Okay. All right. Go back to, here we go. Can we all do it together? Right.
The pattern for 3 again. Sorry.
Yeah,
What's the?
it's 1 2 3.
Oh, okay.
Down, right,
Left.
1, right, up, down, 2 3. 1 2 3. 1 2 3. So notice that I'm not doing a triangle. I am doing a triangle, but it's not 1 2 3, right? There's a little bit of rebound. 1 2 3. So it's really, there's a little loop there, a little loop, up, 1 loop, 2 loop, 3. There's no loop up here. I don't do a loop up there, right? So this is from the bass, the pickup. 3 1 2 3. 1, 2, 3. So this is an interesting choice we can make for the 3 pattern, right? Because you can have, you can actually do this kind of pattern if the music asks you to. So for example, you could do that, but does that fit this music? Not really, no. In fact, there is sort of this lilting movement that we need to have, right? So if you do a, so I'm in the right tempo, but then there are times when I'm not really moving, I'm frozen. That doesn't really carry the music, right, in a physical way, right? So what you're trying to do is, what you're trying to do is find a way that you are best expressing the music with your gesture as you interact with it in physical space, right? So this is a legato beat, legato 3 pattern, right? So you could even do something like this. You could do something like where instead of a loop, right, you have sort of a wave, right? 1, 2, 3, right? So it's not a loop up, right? But it's more of a skateboard that goes. So it's in a very gentle pendulum, right? And the stopping point, rather than it stops for a long time. The moment it stops is just gravity, just, you know how a pendulum goes whip, whip, like this, right? Everybody do that. It's just a pendulum. You know those balls that go like this, right? There's a moment where it stops momentarily because of gravity, right? And sometimes that amount of time depends on what kind of expression you want. Does that make sense? Right? We're using the rules of physics on Earth, right? So you could have an expression that you might have music that goes, but you might have music that's more. Sorry about the sound effects. Okay. All right. Okay. So let's try it. Yeah, I'll play the music for you. You're seeing the iPad screen currently, correct? Yeah. All right. Here we go. Now it's going to start from the downbeat of the part 4, right? Or the cello part, cembalo, right? And 1 like that. Okay. Here we go. And 1. 1, 2, 3, 1. Okay. How did you do? Questions?
I still don't know how to properly emphasize and like when to do that.
So, do you? When I say weight of beats between 1, 2, and 3, is that clear? Okay. So let's do an extreme version where we are emphasizing beat 2 rather than 1 and 3. Like what would that look like? 1, 2, 1, 2, and 3. 1, two, and one, two, one, two, right? Not terrible, but also not particularly musical, right? So what we don't want to do is have any way we emphasize the wrong part of the beat, because sometimes you can go one, two, three, one, two, three. Because if you're only thinking about pattern, you can easily emphasize the wrong beat as being the most important, right? Does that make sense? Okay, what else?
This is a really small thing, but I
Yeah.
noticed that when you're working with your kind of ictus point,
Mm.
it's almost like a mini one of these that you end up using. And I just remember one of my older drum majors used to have his downbeats just like this. And I was wondering, like, did you get that from somewhere, or is that just
No,
something
because
that?
that's a very good question. So, for example, if we're using a baton, right? When we're using our hands, right? Our ictus points, unless you're doing sort of with a finger, there's the ictus, and here's da, da, right? So this is not a particular piece that has a clear da, 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 di, da, 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 di, da. That's not the kind of music this is, right? But you do still need a clear point in time where the orchestra says, I'm going to put my note there, right? So even though you're not making a staccato contact with the plane, bam, 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 bing, bam, you are still making a connection to that plane, the ictus point. Otherwise, you'd be slowing down all the time, right? Or even doing something like 1, 2, and yada, yada, where you slow into the beat. And that's sort of a maddening way some conductors try to be expressive, right? Because then the yan, di, and da, da, da. So then it becomes really, it's sort of a, now, is it now, right? So everybody's interpretation of that downbeat will be different if it slows down into the beat, right? But when we use a baton, right, what we're trying to do is have an ictus point to be at the tip, pam, pi, pam, pi, rather than have this sort of guk, 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 where if the ictus point is at the finger rather than at the tip, then you constantly have this guk, guk, phenomenon, right? So sometimes you may want that. I don't know why, but sometimes you may want that to express some kind of offbeat, right? But most times you want to make sure what you're doing is clear, right? And so that we can play together. Now, this is a controversial subject among conductors because for a long time I thought the best thing to do for the orchestra is to be as clear as possible, right? Makes sense. However, the danger is when you make music making and it becomes about a visual reaction, right? Then what the orchestra does is they start to depend on the visual event or the visual beat, visual cue from the conductor to make the sound. So then what they do is, as you increase your visual acuity about how to play together, you start to pay less and less attention to the auditory cues of the other orchestra members, right? So most professional orchestras, they play behind the beat because they're actually listening to each other, right? And the conductor has to play ahead of the beat, ahead of the sound. Make sense? Right? So oftentimes conductors will conduct in a way that's a little more less clear about the downbeat. So instead of going bum be bum be da dum be da in a very clear way, they will have this sort of so the amount of space that the downbeat is, it's a little more generous in terms of allowing the orchestra to feel where the pulse is.
I have a
Makes
question.
sense. Hang on, let me just finish that point.
Oh, yes,
So,
sorry.
it if your conducting becomes more about clarity rather than making a gesture that fits the musical intent, that's what matters. Okay, because musical clarity is important, and there are pieces where if you're not clear, they're just going to fall apart, right? But something like this, it's more important that you're listening and allowing for room for the orchestra to listen to each other, right? So there's nothing worse than musicians feeling like, especially capable musicians, feeling like they don't have any wiggle room to be musical, right? So you have to allow for that space where you are sending a clear message of what the musical interpretation is, the musical intent is, right? But you're leaving room for them to uh, listen to each other, to make the sound, to make that uh, moment of time of playing together where you're not dictating so much every beat, right? So the importance of passive beats is that you're giving them room to make a musical uh, moment together, right? And the ability to shape things. If every beat has the same strength, then you're not going to be able to really say this note is important. Right? So in that phrase, the important note is really the note with the trill, right? Right? So you got to be able to make that distinction between an important note and a less important note in your conducting, right? So clarity, yeah, it's important, but it's not at the cost of the ensemble feeling like they don't have any wiggle room to be musical. Okay, Rehan, you had a question.
My question would be if you're so free with like timing, how do you ensure like the say the rubato liberties the different sections take match? Like how like what-
Great question. Okay, so in a piece like this, there is going to be gravity pulls between different sections who might want to. They're all different people, right? So
yeah,
no one is going to want to take the exact same amount of time on this phrase,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yet there is a ongoing bass line, right? So you can't just be conducting only the melodic figure, right? You also have to keep the bass line in mind when making these choices, right? So if your stretch and pull is so much on the melodic figure, yeah, then you've lost the bass section and the cellos. So you have to keep everything in perspective of making sure they're all listening, right? So that you're not going too far off the deep end. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So work on this. Maybe, not the whole thing, but maybe just the first page, first three systems until measure 4, 5, 6, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Measure 18.
Would
All
you
right, and
want us
we'll
to
conduct.
see all parts?
Well, I want you to sync through all the parts, right? And be able to conduct at least the first page until measure 18 for each other on Wednesday.
Okay, awesome.
Okay? All right?
One last
Questions?
question. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. When you say singing parts, does that include the bass line as well, or is the bass line not
I would
part
sync through all the parts. Yeah, baseline included.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Okay? Questions? All right. So with the GoReact.com, 10 minutes tops. Try to make it work for 10 minutes. If you can't, then we'll do it in class. Okay? All right. So, and I'll make an assignment for the Brandenburg that's due Monday after we go over it together in class. And I've seen you conduct. I've given you feedback over, and then we're able to see each other. Okay? All right. And then I'll also send you a link to Marianne Ploger's dichord chart, that PDF document, so you have to access. Okay? All right. And so just draw like a keyboard right? Or take an image from just do Google image search for a keyboard, and then write in the numbers, and then try to see if you can draw in with your own interpretation of the dissonance dichords, the perfect dichords, and the modal dichords, right? So actually go through the process of drawing each number and see how they try to imagine what that sounds like, what a minor second versus a perfect fourth sounds, okay? So without sounding it out, just draw on the keyboard the numbers and actually draw the different wave, the 7 cycles, 4 cycles, 2 cycle per second picture of the keyboard. When I did that, that helped me tremendously in trying to physicalize and imagine that sound in my head. Because first you need to have a physical image of that sound, of all of those dichords in your head before you can recognize it. Okay? All right. I will see you Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank
Wednesday,
you.
I'm also sending you links to the CSO online guest speakers. Those are, of course, optional, but some of the speakers have been really fantastic. And I'll send you links. But in order to attend the event, you need to register for the Zoom link. Okay, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
So,